Right. It's good to see everybody here this morning. Members are here. Glad everybody had safe travels to and from. It was cold this morning. Took me a little while to warm up my car, but gave me some time for reflection, which is always good. I want everybody to stay warm and stay safe. If you'd like to turn in your Bibles, Proverbs chapter 25, verse 11 will be our first verse this morning. My sermon title is A Word Fitly Spoken. A word fitly spoken is like, make sure that my batteries, it happens sometimes. Okay, we'll keep going. Very good. All right. A word fitly spoken. Proverbs 25, verse 11 states that a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. Paints a pretty vivid picture, the idea of apples of gold in a setting of silver. I find that to be, I love it when the analogy that's given is something that's very concrete, something that we can really look at. I can picture apples of gold in a silver setting. I see that. I think of this big bowl of silver and having these apples. Now, I don't know if it's talking necessarily about apples of pure gold or if they're just apples that are very golden in color. Either way, it paints a pretty vivid picture. But why did the author write it in this particular fashion? The idea of a word fitly spoken. It's interesting. A word fitly spoken. I liken it to this. I'll give you an example. I don't know if you've ever played, any of you have ever engaged in a game of Mad Libs. Everybody kind of know what the game is? Anybody? Everybody know what Mad Libs are? Okay. Basically, you have this story, and the person that's going to be writing it down, they ask for particular words, and they'll say something like, okay, I need a noun. All right, I need an adverb. I need an adjective. I need this. And what you do is you don't hear what's going on. You just give them the word. And what they do is they write it down in this story. So then after you've given them all of the words, they read the story out. And typically when people are giving words, they give something kind of crazy. It's like, I need a noun. Well, a kangaroo. All right, I need a noun, or I need an adjective like dripping. Okay, that's kind of an unusual thing. You don't usually use those words. So when the story is read, all of a sudden these words come into play. And oftentimes it's one of the most humorous things I've ever heard, especially when you get kids playing it. Kids are fun to play this with because it doesn't matter how silly or how goofy it is, the kids just laugh their heads off because it's just so ridiculous. That's the point. The point is it's taking words that are not supposed to be there, putting them in there, and then you realize at the end of the exercise, it was a ridiculous exercise because the story's ridiculous. The words don't fit, so to speak. Well, the author here is stating that a word fitly spoken is something that is beautiful, something that is appropriate, something that is good, something that can be beneficial, so to speak. So a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. So let's think about that for just a few moments this morning. I have three ways in which a word can be fitly spoken. So let's think about the idea of fitly. It means that it is appropriate. It's something that is good, something that is supposed to be there. It's good to use for the situation in which it finds itself. It is the right word. Not only is it the right situation, but it is the right specific word for that situation. Not only that, it accomplishes a purpose in that situation. So with all of that in mind, let's look at how a word fitly spoken would be like an apple of gold in a setting of silver. Something that would be good, something that would be desirable, so to speak. All right, number one, it has to be the right word. If somebody if we were engaged in that exercise of Mad Libs and somebody said, okay, I'm going to read the story and you're going to give me a word that fits for what it's supposed to be, the exercise wouldn't be near as entertaining. It would be read more like an appropriate story. Makes sense, right? We put the right word in the right place. If you've ever taken a test where it's a fill in the blank, is it important to put the right word in the blank? If you want to get a good grade on that test, it sure is. You better put the right word in there. Much in that same way, it is important that we use the right word for the situation in which we find ourselves. It does not mean, however, that we compromise the word. It merely means that we use the correct word for the situation. Sometimes we have to call a sin no matter what's going on. We have to say that word. We have to use that word, that this is a sin. It is not simply a choice. It is a sin to do something. That would be a word fitly spoken. It's accurate. It's appropriate for the time. So the right word, Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 through 37. Make sure I got myself in the right place. Matthew 12, verses 36 and 37. You know, oftentimes it's hard to find the right words, but it's necessary. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. If this does not give us pause for consideration for what we say to others, there is no other word in Scripture that would make us pause to consider what we say to someone else. The words that we say, we'll be judged by them regardless. We will be judged by the words that we say, and we will have to give an account for what we say. For by our words we will either be justified or we will be condemned. There's only two choices here. There's only two outcomes: justification or condemnation. That's it. So we must be very careful about the words we use in the situation in which we find ourselves. It is important that we remember Scripture tells us that it's not what goes into the belly that justifies us. You know, there were those who sought to keep the old law by keeping the idea about the foods that we were supposed to eat, making sure that we went by the words of the covenant. There are things that we were not supposed to take into our bodies. He says it's not what goes into the belly that justifies us, it's the words that proceed from our mouth. That should apply to us, and it does apply to us even today. And we should keep that very firmly in mind, that what we say is important. We use the right words. And we must be careful that a careless word can cause so much damage simply by saying it. A careless word is not a word fitly spoken. A careless word can cause someone irreparable damage in their spiritual life. It does not mean that we don't need to get across the meaning that needs to be got across. It means that we're careful about the words that we choose. And listen, folks, in the church, we have to be careful. Those who want to throw stones at one another out in the world, that is their business. There's nothing we can do about that. But we can certainly pay heed to what we say in the Lord's body. From the pulpit, I have to measure my words. I have to be careful about what I say. I'm not going to twist the meaning. I'm not going to hold back, but I'm going to be careful about what I say and how I say it. Everyone is listening. Right now, we're going to be putting this out there for the consumption of everyone who sees it, who looks for it, will be able to find it. They're going to be able to see and hear what I say. I have to be careful about what I say, but I have to say it regardless. In Proverbs 29, verse 20, another word, the idea of the right words at the right time. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? I want you to think about this for just a second. I want you to ask yourself, when was the last time you were hasty in what you said? Instead of being measured and thinking about something. Everybody here probably knows at least one person who speaks before they think. They have something in mind and they've got to get it out, and they don't think about what they're saying before they say the words. It does not mean that they're inaccurate. It doesn't mean that they're a liar. It means that they think or they speak before they think. They say the words, and before they even get them out of their mouth, they realize, I think I made a big mistake. I think I said something that probably is going to hurt someone badly. Or, let's go the other direction. They talk before they find out all of the detail. Before they find out everything there is going on, they speak. And they speak from a position of having half the story. Either one is a dangerous position to find ourselves in. Because when we are hasty, we make mistakes. Look at what he says. Do you see a man who is hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. A fool is just a fool. They're going to say foolish things. That's just who they are. That's their nature. They're going to say foolish things. But a man who speaks before he thinks, there's no hope for that. There's no hope for that. That's someone who is not going to have everything before they make their thoughts known. When we are hasty, folks, we make mistakes. And that's not for us to do. We have to be better than that. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 30, the fruit of the righteous is a tree of life, and whoever captures souls is wise. I like this idea. The fruit of the righteous is the tree of life. We think about coming from the tree of life, not providing a tree of life, but that's exactly what we do. When we are righteous, when we engage in righteous behavior, when we do righteous things, we are a tree of life. Why? Because people come to us for life. They come to us to find out what it is we have that they want so desperately and they need so desperately. They come to us. We are a fount of a blessing. We are the tree of life when we are righteous in our behavior. And whoever captures souls, so what are we doing? We're not only acting as the tree of life, but when they get close enough and when they're listening, when they're paying attention, we grab a hold of them and we do everything we can to not let them go. What do we say to people who are seekers? When they come to us as we're righteous and they come to us as a tree of life, do we use a fit word? Do we use words fitly spoken so that we can give truth to those who are seeking the truth? Do we say the right thing? Are we careful? Are we measured? What we say to others. Remember, folks, it's not just a simple matter of saying things. We have to say the right thing at the right time. And I believe that more than anything else, the thing that keeps us from doing that is what goes back to the idea that sometimes we are just hasty in our words instead of thinking and giving time. We talked about it this morning in class, the idea of being considerate. The idea of considerate, when you talk to most people about being considerate, they're thinking, well, I want to make sure that I'm kind, I'm nice to other people. And that certainly is a portion of it. But the idea of being considerate, it means that we consider what is going on. We consider the person that we're speaking to. We consider where they are. Not everybody is where we are in their spiritual maturity. Not everybody is where we are. There are those who are more mature than we are, and there are some that are less mature than we are. And we have to discern where people are, where they are in their spiritual walk. And when we do that, when we're not hasty, when we're measured, and when we're considerate in what we say, we're going to find the right word for the right time in the right circumstance. In that case, we are going to be a tree of life. We're going to be the ones people come to find out about the hope that dwells within us. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Here's Jesus giving us the example, right? If we ever want to know about where can we find in Scripture a word fitly spoken, go to the words of Christ. He always knew what to say, when to say it, and who to say it to. And he says, "Come to me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Why? Because I have the words fitly spoken. "For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Jesus' words are words of comfort, and they are not harshly spoken. He said exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. We think, well, that was Jesus Christ. He's the Son of God. He's deity. Of course he knows how to say the right things, folks. We have everything that Jesus said that we have record of. We have exactly what he said and who he said it to and the manner in which he said it. If we know the words of Christ, then we know what to say and when to say it and who to say it to, and in the circumstances. We can be Christ-like. We are to be Christ-like. And that means looking at the way Jesus spoke to the people that he was speaking to. Look at what he says. His words are words of comfort. He didn't say, "Depart from me, ye sinners." You're all sinners and you're all going to go to hell. And you know what? I'm going to be glad of it. Of course he didn't say that. That's not a word fitly spoken. For one, he didn't mean that. He wanted people to come to him. He didn't want to repel people. He entreated them to come to him. He wanted them, please draw near, listen to the words I have to say. People called him rabbi, teacher. How do you teach if you don't have the right words? Jesus' life was a life of words that were fitly spoken. He says, come to me who labor and are heavy laden. You're beaten down by the world. You're oppressed. You're worried. You're sick with worry. There's nothing for you. You look around and you realize that your life on this earth is going to be short and it's going to be bitter and then you're going to die and there's no hope. I want you to come to me. That's who I want. Because why? I am going to give you rest. It may not be in this life, but this life is of little concern to us. We are here for a short period of time, and then our lives are over, and we go on to a better place. And that's our refuge. That's our place of comfort. He says, for I am gentle. I'm not a harsh master. I'm lowly in heart. And why? You are going to find rest for your souls. That's one of my favorite songs in the songbook. This idea of I'm meek and lowly, and you will find rest for your souls. His yoke is easy. It's not the yoke of the old covenant with all of its rules and statutes and commandments and keeping of the law and the feast days and all of those things. His yoke is an easy one. He said, I want you to love God as yourself, and I want you to love your neighbor as yourself, and keep my commandments. You could sum up the commandments of Christ on both hands. This is what I want you to do. Live as I live. Do as I did. Speak as I speak. A word fitly spoken. Next, we have to have the right voice, right? We can say the proper words, but we can not properly say them. Right? I think everybody here has been either a giver or a recipient of that particular type of mindset, right? You know, there are words that are perfectly appropriate to say, but we may not necessarily say them properly. And that's something that we have to work on. We have to have the right voice in the way that we say things. In Proverbs 15, verse 1, it states that a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. You know, that's almost self-evident, but it doesn't change the fact that oftentimes, even though we know this is the case, we still engage in the kind of behavior that stirs up anger. It says, a soft answer turns away wrath. And yet, in spite of knowing that, in spite of reading that in the Bible, in spite of knowing that in Scripture, instead of using a soft answer to turn away wrath, what do? We fly off the handle. We say things ill-advisedly, so to speak. We do not use words fitly spoken. We use a harsh word, and what does it do? It stirs up something that may not have been stirred up otherwise. A soft answer turns away wrath. You ever been in a group where you realize that there's some tension building up, and you realize that if something's not done fairly quickly, that it's going to spill over, and what's going to happen is you're going to have people that are going to be angry. They're going to leave that place being angry with one another, and maybe having something against one another. That if the right thing had been said in the right way, that would not have happened. That the tensions could have been calmed, things could have been eased. And people could walk away, while they may still disagree about something, they can walk away still as friends and compatriots with a pat on the back and a handshake and say, yeah, listen, I understand we don't agree, but we're still friends. We're still good with one another. But instead of that, you have somebody that'll say something and they'll say it may be the right thing to say, but it is in all the wrong way. And here you go. Then all of a sudden it boils over into anger. And you have people walking away and saying, I'll never talk to them again. I'll never be a part of this again. If this is the way things work, then I don't want any part of it. And there you are. Churches have been split over even smaller things than that. Soft answer turns away wrath. This one was rather funny. I thought this was humorous. In Proverbs 27:14, because listen, I'm not a huge morning person. Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice rising early in the morning will be counted as cursing. I thought this was funny. But it just goes to show that the Lord sees, this is a word fitly spoken. Even the Lord sees this. There are times when it is appropriate to say something, and there are times when it is appropriate to close our mouths. Now, I know the person who is rising up early in the morning, you've seen them. Boy, they're excited. Good morning! Isn't it a great day? And they're just excited to be up and they're excited to be out. And listen, that's great. I appreciate people who are early risers because they're the people that get up and fix the biscuits and the donuts. I appreciate people who get up early. I really do. There's a place for them, and I appreciate that place. However, I'm not one of those people. I don't like to get up really early. I get up early enough to get up and get doing what I'm doing, but I'm not a real early riser. But here it says that someone who blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rising early, it's just as bad as cursing that person. That's how they view it. Word fitly spoken, folks. It doesn't change the fact simply because it's humorous doesn't mean that it's not true. We watch what we say and when we say it. We measure what we say. Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6 states, "Let your speech always be this, gracious." Gracious. What a lesson to learn. Our speech should always be gracious, full of grace, taking into consideration the person that's doing the hearing. Always be mindful of our audience and what we say. Have you ever been with someone somewhere? And if I see smiles come to your faces, I'll know. Have you ever been somewhere with someone who just is not aware of their audience? They start to say something and you realize, okay, I don't think this person realizes who's around, who's standing around with us, who's sitting with us, who's maybe sitting close by, who's part of the group that we're in, and they say something that, while it may be perfectly true, and it may even be the right words, but they are not aware of who they are surrounded by. And their words to the people that are hearing them are not very gracious. They're not taking into consideration their audience. It says that our speech is to be gracious, seasoned with salt, making it palatable, so to speak. Saying words that when people hear them, yes, they hear them, and absolutely we need to tell the truth. We need to speak the word of the Lord at all times, but we season them with salt so that the person in hearing them that may normally say, I don't want any part of that. That doesn't appeal to me in the least. That when they're seasoned with salt, guess what? They may be a little bit more inclined to hear the words. You know, when you say something about the lines of, somebody says something and you realize that what they're saying is untrue. Instead of saying, no, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. If you want an example of this, get on to pretty much any online article and go look at the comment section. You'll see words that are very much not seasoned with salt. They don't care. They have anonymity. They can sit behind a keyboard and they can type whatever they want. They have a username that doesn't give any indication about who they are. They can say whatever they want, so they don't care about their audience. They're just going to get their opinion out there. It doesn't matter who it hurts. But that's not the world we live in. That's not the company we keep. We are around people. We associate with other individuals. And these people's feelings are just as important to them as ours are to us. We have to be careful about how we say things. We season them with salt. You know, there are certain things that you love, but you realize you love them because there's a little salt in them. I like green beans, but you know what? I don't like them if they don't have a little bit of salt in them, right? It has to be some seasoning to make it palatable, to make them taste good. It's the same thing with our speech. He's using a metaphor here, the idea of seasoning with salt. It means making them where people want to hear them. It means being gracious in the way that we say those things. But they're seasoned with salt so that we may know how to answer each person. Are our words fitly spoken? Are they palatable to the people that we're saying them to? Be gracious in what you say. I know that sometimes we feel justified because we've got the truth on our side. But the truth, if it's not seasoned with salt, the world's not going to want to taste it. They're not going to hear it. They'll reject it. They'll reject us, and by doing so, they reject God. And that's not a position we don't want any of our friends or family or loved ones to deal with. Mark chapter 16, verses 15 through 16, the idea of the right voice. Look what he says. He said to them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation," to all the world. "Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned." The idea of having the right voice here, I want you to think about this for a second. is the way we proclaim the gospel, and I hope everyone here is proclaiming the gospel at all times, is the way we proclaim the gospel aimed at drawing in or repelling? Is it aimed at drawing people near, or is it aimed at repelling those who are maybe a little reluctant to hear the word of the Lord? Maybe are a little bit reticent or have been, as they say before, well, I've been burned before and I've been hurt before by the church, and I just, I used to attend here and some things happened and I just really got turned off. Is the way that we reach out to these people, is the way that we proclaim the gospel to them, is it with the idea, with the express purpose of pulling them in a large net, or is it almost aimed at repelling them? Well, if you can't handle this, then you don't need any part of this. If you can't do this, then you don't want the church. You don't want the Bible. You don't want to listen to the Bible. You won't even listen. How are we proclaiming the gospel? Are our words seasoned with salt? Are they aimed at entreating, as the way Jesus did? Come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Is that the way that we go about preaching the gospel to people? Is this how we reach out? If it isn't, that's how we should be reaching out. We need to draw people in with a word fitly spoken. Galatians 6 verse 1. Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him, I like this, in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourselves, lest you too be tempted. The idea of saying things in the right voice, the right tone. When we seek fallen Christians, I have to ask ourselves this: in the way that we speak to them, do we really want them back? Do we really want them back? If we really want them back from a life of sin, they've fallen, and they've gone back into the world, and they're in a transgression, and they're caught up in that transgression, we have to ask ourselves, the way that we're speaking to them, do we really want them back? Because I dare say there have been many times where rather than entreating such a one in a spirit of gentleness, instead we have repelled them with attacks on their character. I'm not throwing rocks at anyone in here. I'm saying that we have to look at ourselves. We have to truly examine ourselves and ask ourselves this: when we go to this person, when we're desirous that they get out of the transgression that they're in, we want them to come back to the Lord, to repent of that sin, that trespass against God. We have to ask ourselves this: are we using words fitly spoken? We're saying the right thing, but in the right way, in the right voice. Are we measured? Are we calm? Are we gentle? Do we entreat? Or do we go about? Do we do like you see in the old movies with the villagers with the pitchforks and the torches? Because folks, sometimes that's how we go about trying to find somebody and bring them back. No, we go about bringing them back as Christ would bring them back. Come unto me. Lastly, we have to make the right impression. We have to use the right word. We have to use it in the right way. And we have to make the right impression with it. There's a couple of ways that we look at this. Let's go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. We have to ask ourselves this: does our speech reflect a follower of Christ? When we say these things, when we use the words that we use and the way that we use them, does it reflect a true follower of Christ? Or does it reflect some religious zealot that really doesn't have any loyalty to anything other than to the desire to be right at all costs? That's our question. Are we a follower of Christ, or are we a follower of ourselves? Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16, it states, "You are the salt of the earth." It gets back into the idea of salt, right? Salt was an important thing. It was an important commodity. It was used in a lot of different ways. But we are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? That's true. It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. The idea of the church being a light on the hill is still very much the case. The world is in darkness, has been in darkness since the beginning of man's fall from God. It has been in darkness. It will continue to be in darkness until the Lord comes back. The only light there is the light of Jesus Christ. And the only light of Jesus Christ is in the church. We are the light to the world. We are a city on a hill. Speaking back to the idea of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a city set on a hill. It is said that you could see it for miles before you ever got to town. You could see that city on a hill because of the gold of the temple. It's a little bit different from Atlanta. Georgia's a pretty forested area, and you really don't see Atlanta until you it jumps out at you. You turn a corner, and there it is, all the big skyscrapers and everything like that. Jerusalem wasn't like that. Jerusalem was set up on top of a hill. It was easily seen, and all of the gold plating in the temple made it very much an eye. It caught your eye, even when you were afar off. Well, we're like that. People are far off from God, and we are that light on the hill. That's our job. That's our impression. That's the impression that we are to make to those who are seeking the truth, those who are seeking Christ. We are the city on a hill, a light which cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good work, and more importantly, and this is the most important thing of all, we want them to see our good works, but the reason for this is this. We want them to give glory to our Father who is in heaven. That's the impression. That's what we want to get across to folks. It's not us. It's God. The reason that we do what we do is because of God. The reason that we have a hope is because of God. The reason that we do good things is because of God. Everything we do is to the glory of our Father who made us, who is in heaven. That's why we're the light on the hill. And our light shines through our actions. And lest we forget, our actions include the words that we speak. Our words are included in our actions. So when it talks about the idea of spiritual works, it includes the words that we say, words that are fitly spoken. Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 7. Sometimes silence speaks louder than our words. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that was led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opens not his mouth. We'll get to one here in just a couple moments. Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 7. It says, there's a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silent and a time to speak. Sometimes our silence says more than anything we could ever say. I've been, most everyone here has been around times where there's been sickness and oftentimes there's a death. Sometimes we feel like we have to say something. There's something that we need to say, some bit of wisdom that we're going to say from our mouths that's going to maybe change everything. And sometimes we don't realize that often silence is better than speaking a word. Kind of like that man who's happy to get up in the morning. It'd be better really if he just kept silent. Same thing with us. Jesus knew when it was time to speak and it was time to open his mouth and say words. It says that he was silent before his accusers. In Matthew 27, verse 11 through 14, now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you king of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, you have said so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. The idea here is that Jesus knew when it was time to say something and when it was time to keep silent. Sometimes that is for us to determine. We look at the situation we find ourselves in, the environment that we find ourselves in, and sometimes it is better to just not say a word and let our silence speak for us. Jesus did that. But also, Matthew 26, verses 59 through 64. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death. But they found none, though many false witnesses came forward. At last, two came forward and said, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest stood up and said, have you no answer to make? Why is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus remained silent. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now what happened is this high priest was asking for an answer to something, but he wasn't happy with the answer. He didn't realize he was going to get the answer he had, because as Jesus knew there was a time to be silent, there was a time to speak. At this point, Jesus said to him, you have said so, but I tell you from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. He knew when to be quiet, but he knew when to speak and say the word. Jesus was not a man for vain babbling, to say something simply because he had an opportunity to say so, to take every opportunity to say some sort of word that came into his mind. But when he spoke with authority. I am the Son of Man, and you will see me coming. What words? Words fitly spoken. These men needed to hear these words, and that's exactly what he said to them. We have to have the right words, we have to have the right voice, and we have to make the right impression with everything that we've got. And that's exactly what happened. Because it was after he said these words that they became so enraged and frantic about what he had just said. So they stopped their ears. They didn't even want to hear it because he had spoken with authority, but he said the words that they could not bear to listen to. So we ask ourselves, is a word fitly spoken like apples of gold? Are the words that we speak to the people that we come in contact with, are they words fitly spoken? If they're not, they need to be. They need to be. Remember, we're the light on the hill. When people hear the words coming from our mouths, they need to hear the right words and in the right way, and they need to make the right impression. So I want you to think about that. I want you to study this for yourself. Look at these examples and think for yourself. Ask yourself this question. It's a time for self-examination. That's exactly what it is. That's all we're supposed to do anyway, is self-examine ourselves. Look at ourselves and make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. If you're guilty of sin, if you've committed trespass against one another or against God, we want you to make that right this morning. Repent of that sin and come back. Use a word fitly spoken. I'm sorry. I repent. Please forgive. Words fitly spoken. If you need to make that declaration this morning, we want you to do that. If you need to become a New Testament Christian, we want you to do that. Whatever your need might be. Come while we stand and while we sing.